Hello and welcome to this Chalkbeat Ideas event. I'm Matt Barnum, Chalkbeat's Ideas Editor. Thank you for joining us. We can't see each other, but please know that there are hundreds of educators and advocates, parents and journalists, and others who care about education on this Zoom right now, which makes me really happy. I'm so glad to be here with you. Chalkbeat Ideas is home for discussion about the big questions, big issues, and big debates shaping American education. And at the moment, a big issue is the state of the teaching profession. Let's get into it. We've got an hour together, and I'm sure it will fly by. We'll start with a brief presentation from me sharing new data on teacher turnover. Then we'll have a discussion with our panelists, and then we'll get to a Q&A from you all. Although we'll get to this at the end, you can feel free to type questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom throughout the conversation. Feel free to upvote the questions you want asked. Before we talk about the state of the teaching profession, it's worth briefly noting that the state of data about the teaching profession is not good. You would think it would be easy to figure out if we've lost more teachers in recent years, but it's not easy. I can tell you from firsthand experience. There is very limited national data available. State data is spotty and runs on a significant lag. So that's why over the course of a few months, I undertook an extensive effort to find every piece of state level turnover data I could. This was a sort of beg, borrow, and steal situation, minus the stealing, of course. I use a wide array of sources, state databases, academic reports, unpublished analyses that were kindly shared, a public records request in one case. I'm really thankful for all the researchers and state staffers out there who did these analyses and answered my questions, and there were many questions. I was able to compile data from 21 states going back to 2019. Here's what I found. The headline is yes, schools in most states have lost significantly more teachers than usual in recent years. Let me explain this graphic. In each state, it sets a baseline teacher turnover between the 2018-19 school year and the 2019-20 school year. In other words, the year before the pandemic. That's set at 0. Then it compares the next 6 years through the summer of 2025 to the pre-pandemic baseline year. Generally, the definition of turnover was the share of teachers leaving public school teaching, not just switching schools or districts, though in a couple states I had to use a slightly different definition because that's all that was available. That all means we should be careful in comparing precise numbers across different states. What these results mean is that any number above 0 means turnover is higher than the year before the pandemic. These are 8 of the 21 states, and I'll show another 8 shortly. But the pattern was fairly consistent. As you can see, after the first year, almost all of the numbers were above 0. That is, there's been a significant and in many cases a sustained rise in teachers leaving classrooms in many states. This is shown here in percentage point terms. So for instance, you can look at Arkansas, which experienced about a 3 percentage point increase in teachers leaving in 2022 compared with 2019. That has dipped down recently to close to 2 percentage points above the pre-pandemic base. You can see that teacher turnover generally peaked in 2022 and is trending back down in most states, though in some cases, like Arkansas, remains elevated. Across the 21 states that I examined, only 2, Connecticut and Maryland, Connecticut shown here, did not show any meaningful increase in teacher turnover. The other 19 did. It's important to note we still don't have any data for right now, as in the summer of 2026, and we won't for a while. And there are 29 other states I couldn't find good data on. Still, this is the most comprehensive accounting of teacher turnover available, and unfortunately, it's still incomplete. Here are 8 more states. You'll note the data in these states only runs through 2024, not 2025. That's the most recent year available in these places. I'll make 2 other points. In 2021 or so, when I was looking at this data, I saw the dip in the summer of 2020, and then this rise in 2021 that sort of canceled out the initial dip. I thought then, okay, turnover would just return to the pre-pandemic norms. But it didn't. It went up again. And so the second key is that the cumulative loss of teachers since 2020 has been quite substantial. A rise of 2 percentage points in one year might not be a big deal, but that sort of rise over multiple years, I would suggest, is quite impactful for schools, students, and educators. The shaded red part, minus any green, shows the cumulative loss relative to the pre-pandemic baseline year. Even though turnover is trending down now, and in some cases has fully returned to the pre-pandemic base, the effect of prior years' losses may persist in schools. Let's look at one specific example of this. Texas, the largest state with turnover data available. This shows the share of teachers who left public school teaching each year. The first thing to note is that attrition had been remarkably stable in the decade right before COVID. For many years, it hovered right between 10 and 11% and didn't budge at all. Then when COVID hit, after a brief dip, rates jumped to well over 12%. Again, a single year increase like that is probably not a big deal, but we're now at 5 straight years of higher turnover in the state. If Texas had kept its pre-pandemic turnover rate, that would have meant 35,000 fewer teacher exits. To put that in perspective, the current Texas teacher workforce is about 370,000. So we're talking about a 10% of the current teacher workforce. This is the same graphic I showed earlier, and I'm just re-showing it so you can look at Texas relative to other states. Remember, the definitions across states may be slightly different, so we shouldn't compare them too literally. But eyeballing this, you can see that while Texas has been on the higher side of cumulative loss, it's not an outlier. Turnover is evenly felt across schools. Turnover is not evenly felt across schools. This is data from South Carolina where rates were broken down by poverty status, Title I schools versus non-Title I schools. And what's notable is that high poverty schools already lost more teachers each year before the pandemic, and in recent years that gap has increased. Again, we can think of this as having a cumulative effect on high poverty schools. So going from about 3 percentage point gaps to 5 percentage point gap may not be a huge deal, but the gap already existed, and it's now 3 straight years that the gap is larger than it was before the pandemic. Because most other states don't break down the data like this so neatly, I don't know if the same pattern has shown up elsewhere, but either way, since high-need schools struggled with turnover to begin with in many cases, the effect of any increase in turnover might be more severely felt in those schools. So what's driving this trend? I don't have definitive answers, and I suspect there are many explanations, not a single one. I'll go through a few quickly since we'll spend a lot of the remaining time discussing this. We know teacher stress was very high during the pandemic for a variety of reasons. Lots of teachers reported student behavioral challenges when they returned to school buildings, and behavior is a top source of stress generally among teachers. Other staff, including principals, have left schools at higher rates too. This is sort of a double whammy because that can destabilize schools itself, and it can be a contributor to teacher turnover because there's a trickle-down effect when someone leaves in education. A principal departs, so an assistant principal takes a role, and then a teacher becomes an assistant principal, and then you have a classroom to fill. Another potential explanation is the fact that teacher pay has actually slightly fallen, teacher salary has slightly fallen in real dollars in recent years. Plus, many other professionals now have the perk of remote work. Teachers don't have that. That combination may make teaching less appealing. There's also some evidence of when unemployment rates are higher, teachers are more likely to stay teaching because there just aren't good alternatives. And some of the trends we see line up with that, including the dip in turnover in 2020 and the more recent dip in 2025. That said, I don't think the macroeconomic picture is what's driving teachers out in the aggregate. Right before the pandemic, the unemployment rate was also very low, and we didn't see a big increase in teachers leaving. Prior research has found teacher turnover linked to small but notable declines in student achievement. That was before the pandemic. To my knowledge, we don't have good evidence directly on the link between pandemic era turnover and student learning. And it's important to acknowledge and note that not all teacher turnover is bad. Sometimes people leave teaching because it's not a good fit, and that's good for everyone. Sometimes schools make the decision not to ask teachers back who aren't effective. But what I worry about is that we may have seen more of our top teachers leave because they're best equipped to find jobs outside of teaching or move to administration within schools. I worry they're being replaced with less effective teachers. That's a hypothesis that I hope researchers will examine. But at a moment when we are still seeing students behind academically, I would posit that the cumulative loss of teachers should at least be considered as a potential reason that learning recovery has been relatively sluggish. The last thing I'll note is that we will make the full data publicly available. I'm happy to answer individual questions from researchers, journalists, and others who want to use the data. Just reach out to me by email. Okay, let's bring on our panelist. Matthew Kraft is a professor of education and economics at Brown University. Matt has served in both federal and local policy roles as a senior economist at the White House, at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. His research focuses on two primary areas: improving the effectiveness of K-12 teachers and schools, and examining how education systems can adapt to and address climate change. He began his career as a high school humanities teacher. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. Right back.
Next next we have Megan Cyril, who is a fifth grade teacher at Clover Avenue Elementary School in Los Angeles, California. She is a national board certified teacher. She was recognized as the 2022 LAUSD Teacher of the Year, the 2022 LA County Teacher of the Year, and a 2023 California Teacher of the Year finalist. Megan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Megan, I'm sorry we outnumber you with a Matt majority, but I'm really glad that you could join us. I want to start with you. So my presentation offered some challenges facing the teaching profession, but let me ask you why you're one of so many teachers who have decided to stay in the classroom. What do you like about teaching?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to be in the classroom for 18 years. This year will be the 19th year, and I have to say, at the end of the day, it's the kids. The students are the best part of the work. I have thoughtful conversations with my kids. They're funny. I've got the best stories from them. Um, And this work is really meaningful, so that keeps me motivated. But having said that, to get to year 18, I really needed to have a strong support system. So I'm lucky to have a family that's very supportive. My husband is great. He listens to me complain. And I've got colleagues. I've had amazing administrators who have helped me along the way to deepen my practice and know that whatever challenges are coming up, we'll be able to work on those and face those together.
Your husband is another Matt, right? We learned.
He,
Okay.
yeah, he is.
So you're used to Matt's. Okay, let's go to another Matt, Matt Kraft. Matt, can you contextualize these numbers that I shared about teacher turnover with what you found about the longer term health and status of the teaching profession?
So I'm thrilled that we're here talking about these questions of what's going on with the teacher workforce so that we can try to address the continuing decline and multiplying challenges that COVID has created in our students' educational success. And my colleague, Melissa Lyon, and I tried when COVID hit to understand when all these stories were coming out about the challenges teachers were facing and the stress and the burnout they were experiencing, where were we in this moment in terms of a historical perspective? And we set out, much like you did, Matt, to try to collect data, which is a hard thing to do in our decentralized data environment in the US. And across a dozen different data sets, we found that almost uniformly, whether you're measuring the overall health of the teaching profession based on what parents say about what they want for their kids. Do they want them to go into a teaching career? What actual undergrad students or high school seniors say about whether they're interested in becoming a teacher, whether or not you just count enrollment in teacher preparation programs or licensures issued by states, or you just ask teachers like Megan about their overall satisfaction on the job, that we in this current moment are at or in several of our measures very near the lowest overall health of the teaching profession in the last half century. And so, what I think the data that you've shown um, contextualizes is that on top of that decline, which started around 2010, we've had this now uptick on leaving the profession of about call it 10 to 15 to 20% of our baseline. And that creates even further challenges.
So let's talk about why. And Megan, let's come back to you and perhaps you can talk about colleagues that you've seen leave. Why have they left? What are some of the reasons they've left?
This is a great question. And like you shared in your presentations, it is multiple reasons. I've mentored early career teachers who felt that um, the expectations of being a new teacher, they are really overwhelming. This is hard work. But to learn new curriculum, develop relationships with parents, it is really challenging. And some of my colleagues just didn't feel supported to find their feet. And so they left the profession. I've had colleagues who were in their mid-career and didn't feel supported to be both educators and parents. Um, because there is a little bit of a time issue and lack of flexibility. And so ultimately, they chose their families over the profession. And then I've had colleagues who retired earlier than expected because they just felt with increased micromanagement and scrutiny the joy of teaching is becoming harder and harder to find. So I would hope that we would consider what are the structures and systems in place so that teachers feel supported from the beginning of the career through to retirement so they can continue to thrive, deepen their practice, and remain in the classroom for the students.
Can you speak to the Megan, just to follow up the micromanagement issue? Like, what does that look like? Have you seen that increase over the course of your career, and why does it bug teachers so much? And this is something I've heard from talking to educators.
Yes, I know accountability is important, but I think there can be overkill in accountability. So sometimes when I am meeting with my grade level colleagues and we are reviewing student assignments, I am spending more time filling in Google Forms and checking boxes than I am doing the deep thinking, the reflection, and the planning. And so I would like to be able to use my time effectively to collaborate so I can move forward for my kids. I don't want to spend time checking boxes.
Matt, can you talk about what you think was drove the long-term decline in the teaching profession, and also what you think might have driven the uptick in teacher turnover that I document here?
These are really important and admittedly hard questions for social scientists to nail down, especially because these types of declines in overall health of the profession are likely multifaceted. In our attempt to identify some of the primary drivers, things that emerged are really echoing what Megan has talked about. We had this decline at least begin notably around um, the 2010s. And that's right around the period where more intensive teacher accountability started to be implemented. Now, ways in which it was actually applied varied radically. A few teachers were actually removed from their positions, but that changed the degree to which I think their professional autonomy was actually constrained and perceptions of job security. But that not alone certainly can't explain what's going on. We've had stagnant real wages in the teaching profession relative to at least increasing variation in higher earning outside among college educated earners, let alone among kind of median wages. And so there's certainly a compensation part that I think helps it explain some of these patterns. And then beyond that, I think we have to start asking questions about more recently, how does, uh, for example, changes in ability to work from home. Most estimates put that at about 8% of wages that workers feel like they're willing to give up to work from home. I'm sitting here in my shorts and slippers, and that I put a price on that. That's quite convenient for me. And so that change relative to other college educated professionals has really set teaching apart. I think another piece is also more recently with turnover, the dual challenge that the rise of the kind of bundle of both social media and cell phones has created around students' attention span, impulse control, overall social and emotional well-being, and layered on top of that, the trauma that students experience, both in terms of their families and loved ones' health and economic well-being in COVID and the post-COVID era, has created just challenges for teachers' work in the classroom and really elevated the need for the supports that Megan has highlighted. And in terms of the joy factor, it's hard to pin down in any specific empirical way, but I do think we should be asking questions about how states that have passed or attempted to pass laws about not teaching divisive concepts both constrain teacher autonomy and take away from their own kind of joy of teaching in ways that they think are relevant and meaningful.
Matt, can I stick with you for a sec to speak about what we know from research evidence about how teacher turnover affects schools and students?
So when I look at the numbers you've presented, Matt, and I see, call it a 1.5 to 2 percentage point increase in teachers leaving the teacher workforce in a state, I don't think we should look at that and say the house is on fire. I think we should look at that and, as you flagged, we should ask who is turning over. Um, Younger workers may be entering the profession and figuring out if this is a good fit for them. Um, But I do think that we should be concerned because this is happening in a time when the overall health of the profession has been in steady decline. And we are desperately trying to reverse these declines, both in the health of the profession and in our students' performance. I think that we should be concerned not just about the turnover, however, but about the lost investment in all the mentoring and professional development that we've invested in these teachers that leaves when they leave. And so you, we have to think about the kind of value of the investment we make in teachers and in keeping them in the profession. And I think we need to be really concerned about the obvious equity implications. When there are fewer teachers, um, teachers sort across schools because they have more job opportunities and options. And when pay is the same across large districts or even across districts that are serving generally similar communities with economic resources that are the same, so the pay scales are similar, then they choose to teach in places where there may be more support or there may be more advantageous working conditions. And that often is highly correlated to students' race and socioeconomic status.
Megan, could you speak to, from a school level perspective, the effect of more of your colleagues leaving on how that affects you, your students in the school?
Yeah, I think about the effect on the students. We actually had an experience where we had a classroom and could not find a credentialed teacher. And so that group of students had a series of subs throughout the year. And when you think about the loss of learning, um, the fact that there were social emotional skills that they were not working on and mastering, it just snowballed. And in the subsequent grade levels, you found those teachers having to now pick up the pieces and fill in the gaps, and it just created a lot of pressure. It was also, really devastating for our staff to not have that cohesion, to not be able to work together because you need that trust. I also think about an experience I had at a school site. We saw from our data that writing was an area of need. So a few of us teachers got trained on a writing program. We trained the whole staff. And over the course of 5 years, we were able to see great gains. Teachers were more confident in their writing instruction. Students enjoyed the writing process, and we saw gains in our state standardized test scores. After about 5 years, we had a lot of turnover at the school site, and we were starting from square one again, and having to rebuild that foundation. And so we couldn't really move up and move forward, and we didn't see those same gains. So I've seen both sides of it, and just how important it is to have a staff that has trust, is cohesive, and can do that work together for the benefit of the entire school community.
Let's talk about what response, if we do think if educators and policymakers do think turnover is a problem, what is the response to try to keep more teachers? I actually want to start with one idea that people have talked about, which is teacher merit pay, which is controversial. But there's some evidence. There was a recent pair of studies that I wrote about in South Carolina showing achievement gains from instituting merit pay. A Texas program, despite Texas's challenges with turnover that I showed, they a recent the Texas study found that merit pay increased retention for more effective teachers. Matt, can you speak to your thoughts and the evidence based on merit pay and whether that's a policy worth pursuing?
I think it's important to step back and ask, is the policy objective we're trying to accomplish narrowly about retaining more teachers, or is it about something that we're trying to do for students that retaining more teachers might help us to accomplish? Because you could retain more teachers in ways that may be particularly helpful for students, and then in ways that may be less helpful for students. And so I don't think that narrowly saying, hey, how do we get this turnover rate down is what makes sense in thinking about merit pay, because most of those are asking, hey, how can we optimize um, getting the teachers we most need in front of the teacher students who most need them, and recognizing and rewarding their effort. My read of that literature is that there is promise in a kind of macro sense of rewarding teachers for their effort and performance on the job. I would argue that a system that is less, at least perceived, if not potentially in a year-to-year basis, actually idiosyncratic, um, in terms of a single performance year, salary tied bonus, that a more sustainable career ladder approach to merit in the sense that you can earn through years of performance and subjective evaluations of your supervisors, and a step on a permanent career advancement ladder would likely be more beneficial for turnover. Um, and I think while we don't have as compelling overall rigorous evidence, would impact the younger generation that's considering teaching relative to other careers. Like, hey, what is my potential career arc in that profession? Will I be recognized? When I go back to my 10-year college reunion, what can I say my title is and what I've accomplished and how I've grown as a professional in a way that's publicly recognized? And so I do think the evidence on some versions of merit pay, particularly when they are promoting kind of collaborative school-wide efforts, um, are promising. But I don't think when people hear the word merit pay, they necessarily think about that or career ladders. I think they think about let's estimate teachers' contributions to test scores and pay based on that in a given year. And that's not what I think narrowly the evidence suggests or what I recommend.
Megan, I am curious your thoughts about merit pay. You know, you as also as someone who has like three Teacher of the Year things that I read in your bio. Are you a big fan of merit pay as an idea?
Well, unfortunately, those recognitions did not come with a pay bump, but I did get a lovely box of chocolates that I got to share with Matt, my husband. But I would agree with Matthew on this topic. While pay is important, and yes, teachers should be paid more across the board, in my discussions with teachers, a lot of the things that they're asking for come back down to the basics. We want to be fully recognized for all of the work that we are doing at the school site. Sometimes that's translation, that's additional parent support, coaching opportunities. And so looking at the full value that teachers are bringing to the community, and pay is a portion of that. But again, I wouldn't necessarily tie that to test scores. I think when we look at what creates a healthy school environment, it's also about that community building that we're doing, and looking at how students are feeling included and seen and supported in their school environment. So there's a lot more to what we're doing than just that test scores piece.
What do you think policymakers and educators should do to try to retain more teachers if that's what they want?
Yeah, what I would love to see is a multi-tiered system of supports for teachers, just like we have for students, right? So we have your tier one group of students, they have access to the curriculum and resources. Your tier two, your students who need the more intensive support, have accommodations and modifications. Your tier three, those are your intensive needs students who may need additional adult support, pull-out services. I would love to see us have some kind of model of that for teachers. And this is based in the work of Dr. Jacqueline Ollison, who recommends a multi-tiered system of supports for teachers. There are things all teachers need: high quality professional development, high quality instructional materials, um, a fully outfitted school with supplies and full staff. That should be the tier one across the board. Then we look at schools that maybe have had additional or a lot of teacher turnover. They may need additional supports in building that positive school community. Maybe they need additional administrative help, or out of classroom supports. We should be providing that for those schools. And then the tier three, I would imagine, to be schools that have gone through very traumatic events, perhaps a wildfire, a school shooting. Those schools are going to need additional, very intensive supports to ensure the health and well-being of their students and staff. So just like we meet our students where they are at with the necessary supports, we need to do the same for teachers. And that needs to not just be a one-off. We have to have that as a system. So I'm very proud to be part of a group called CDAN, the California Educator Diversity Action Network, that is bringing together educators, administrators, researchers, public education advocates to look at the issue of retention in the state of California and say, how can we set up this system? How can we set up these supports so that teachers feel supported throughout their career and they will stay?
Matt, to a point you made earlier, should policymakers be looking to reduce teacher turnover? I mean, there are some who would look at these numbers and say, okay, that could be a concern, but we don't know the teachers who left. So there really we shouldn't have a goal of reducing teacher turnover in the aggregate. We should be looking at who's leaving and trying to retain the better teachers and saying goodbye to the teachers who are less effective.
I think that the uptick in leaving the profession is telling us something about the working conditions and the sense of success that teachers are experiencing in this moment. And so I think we should be concerned, but not narrowly because of teacher turnover as the end product. I think it's telling us something broader about the ways in which our teachers are feeling successful with their students. That is a major driver of what draws people to the profession and what keeps them there. Now, teachers, Megan, myself, when I was a teacher, are just like everyone else. We respond to incentives. We care about being able to live a lifestyle that we can afford with our compensation. And so I would argue that we should care about turnover and that part of the solution that we have available to us is to think about paying teachers differently. I don't think it's likely feasible to have across the board raises to the degree that would be necessary to meaningfully change turnover in the aggregate. But I do think we could, through an expanded range of potential earnings, attract and retain um, folks who were motivated by that potential career growth. And I do think there's hard questions to ask about the trade-offs we've made around investing in more overall staff and in investing in defined benefit pensions relative to what we could potentially do with that set of resources in elevating in differentiated roles and pay that recognizes the differences and the challenges teachers face across schools.
Thank you. And we're going to get to questions in a second. So for folks can continue to put questions in the Q&A, though at this point, maybe your best investment is upvoting the questions that you want asked. Just to elaborate on the point that you raised, Matt, you're alluding to the fact that teacher pay has been declining recently and flat in the longer term, even though funding for education has generally been going up. And that money has gone towards adding additional staff, sometimes more teachers, but often non-teaching positions, paraprofessionals, social workers, assistant principals, and a greater share of teachers' total compensation package has gone to non-salary benefits, including pensions, retirement, and health insurance. And some people have wondered whether that's a good trade-off, whether we should be plowing more of that money that policymakers have been investing in schools into teacher salary rather than into hiring more people, including non-teaching staff. Megan, I would love your thoughts on that. Perhaps you've seen more staff at your school in the 18 years, and I wonder if you think that has paid off. Would you like to have seen more of that money go into raising your and your colleagues' pay?
Selfishly, of course, I would like to be paid more, but I do see the benefit of having staff. I've been fortunate these past couple of years to have a TA with me in the classroom who's helped me to meet individual needs of students because it's easier with four hands than with two. So it's tough to ask for the trade-off. Um, what I would advocate for is we need both. We just need bigger pie for all of it. It is very hard to expect teachers to wear all of the hats and not have the support and not have the compensation. I'm not a trained social worker. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a nurse, although I do put band-aids on and give ice packs to my kids. It is really, it takes a full community. And so I think we have to look at a community schools model, and we need to look at making sure that we are supporting our teachers to meet the needs of the students in their role and also have all of the support staff because it's taking all of us. It's all our responsibility.
I'm going to get into audience questions. There were a few at the beginning that were sort of asking about the data that I want to briefly address myself. So one question was, does the data include all teachers, public, private, and charter schools? In general, this is only public school teachers. Whether it includes, I'm assuming in most cases it does include charter schools because in most states they're categorized as public. You'd have to check the specific state. There was one state that I can recall, Louisiana, that I don't think includes charter schools, and I don't think any of them includes private schools. There was another question about an article from Education Next that indicated that teachers were not leaving. the profession, um, and they're not leaving more than at least similar careers. Maya and the question was, how do I reconcile? On the question of similar careers, I'm not looking at similar careers. I'm just looking at teachers compared to themselves in prior years. The data used in the EdNext article, I forget exactly where it came from. I think it maybe was census. I don't think it's equipped to measure precise changes, small changes over time, because it's a sample and there's error in that sample. The other thing is that I have serious questions about the reliability of that data because that does not the trends that it show do not line up with the vast majority of states with data available. And so you would have to think that the 29 other states that are not in my sample are just so wildly different than the seemingly semi-random 21 states that I look at. And I just don't think that's likely. So I personally, and I've looked at this data closely, I personally would not put a great deal of stock in that data. A couple people asked about specific states, whether I had data from New York or New Hampshire, and unfortunately, I didn't. I wasn't able to get data from either of those states. That doesn't mean the data doesn't exist. And in some cases, I found some data, but I didn't include it because I came to believe it wasn't reliable or it didn't go all the way back to 2019. Um, all right, let's get to questions from the audience for Matt and Megan. This was a pre-submitted question, so I want to honor people who pre-submitted questions. Then I'll get to the audience ones. Um, how do you suggest supporting very experienced teachers to keep them engaged? And I think that's a great question for Megan that perhaps you can speak to.
Yeah, I will say for me, I have no intention of leaving the classroom. I don't want to go into administration because, like I said, the kids are the best part of the day. But I do think there is a role for teacher leadership at the both at the school site and within a district. So I would love to see that. You know, we have teachers who can be mentors to early career teachers. We have so much expertise that I feel is in many ways untapped by the districts. So, you know, for those of us who plan to stay in the classroom, I think there are still ways that we can lead at our school sites and within our district that will be for the benefit of the whole.
An upvoted question. School principals are rarely discussed. Is there any study about the effectiveness of school principals? School leadership who don't support teachers are often the reason that teachers leave. Matt, perhaps you can speak to if there's any research on this.
There is a sizable body of research, both qualitative and quantitative, of trying to better understand the importance and role of school leadership. Estimating the impacts of principals is a difficult task, but suffice to say, when you simply talk to teachers to understand what influences their experience on the job, and more importantly, what can you actionably do about those working conditions, it's really the principle that I would argue the evidence suggests is the key point of leverage and change. The principle can set the tone for the culture of a school about whether or not teachers are working collectively and they have trust and respect and open doors so that if you're struggling, you let someone in, you ask for help, you give each other feedback, that you collectively uphold a common set of behavioral norms for students. It's not everyone on their own and behind closed doors, and that you publicly celebrate success in a way that teachers feel valued. And so I think that there's strong evidence that principals are really key parts of changing how teachers experience their working conditions. But I will note that that then opens up yet the kind of Pandora's box of, well, if we're struggling to retain teachers, I would argue we're probably equally struggling to retain principals and identify effective principals. And so we get into that challenge at the next level.
And I'll just say before I turn it over to you, Megan, to speak to this of you, I didn't look at this quite as systematically, but there is evidence in many of the same states that saw rises in teacher turnover that there were coinciding rises in principal turnover. And I think that can be both a cause of teacher turnover and an exacerbator of the effects of teacher turnover. Megan, do you want to speak to the importance of principals?
Yeah, I've heard a quote from Dr. Travis Bristol that teachers don't leave schools, they leave principals. So I agree with Matthew. Principals set the tone, they create that school climate and culture, and they need a lot of support. It is a huge expectation to expect one person to be your instructional lead, to be working on logistics, managing and supporting student behavior. And our principals are not always equipped with the skills or supported in that. So I would really love to see more discussion of how we support principals to set that positive tone. Because positive or negative, whatever the principal is getting from above, it's trickling down to the teachers, and it's either creating that environment of anxiety or that environment of excitement for the work that we have to do.
I'll go to a couple more audience questions. One asks, several states shown in the graph are right to work states like Arizona. What role does lack of union/union support play in teachers leaving the profession? I would just say from the data I analyzed, I don't think we can make any strong inferences based on that. There were a couple northeastern states that I think do have strong labor unions, Connecticut and Maryland, that didn't see the rise, but there were also, others that did see the rise in teacher turnover, Massachusetts, which I'm not sure whether we visualized or not, but that also showed a pretty significant rise. But Megan, if I don't know if you have thoughts about, teachers unions on this.
I worked in charter at the beginning of my career and did not have the benefit of the union. I am now in a district and have that. And what I would say is one thing is that is important is I feel like I can go to my administrator, share my concerns and share my struggles, and not feel like there will be a punitive damage or I'm going to be, let go the next day. And that's really important that teachers have the ability to advocate for themselves and for their students with their administration.
Another person asked, do we know where these teachers went? As in, are they gravitating towards a specific career? Not in the data I have. We know from other data that teachers are often leaving to continue to work in education, which I think speaks to the turnover in other roles. So a lot of teachers are leaving to become assistant principals or even principals or other administrator, or maybe they're want to become a librarian. And so some of that turnover might be not necessarily bad if they're changing roles or moving up. But the fact that we've seen that's always been the case. So the fact that we've seen the rise suggests that something else is going on. We also know that some teachers are leaving for other professions, and some teachers may be leaving and they're not necessarily working. Um, Okay, another question. Are there patterns in turnover specifically with special education or self-contained special education teachers? Another question asked, some early work I did showed that the number one reason teachers of students with emotional/slash behavioral disorders left was the lack of administrative report. Lack of administrative support? What more current information do we need to collect to get at this major issue? Because I continue to hear this. Matt, do you want to speak to it all teacher turnover among special education teachers? Do we know, for instance, whether it's consistently higher among special education teachers?
I do believe the evidence suggests that turnover is higher both among special education teachers as well as other hard to staff subjects in grade levels, middle school relative to high school and elementary, as well as in other STEM positions. And so that kind of revolving door contributes to the challenges we face in staffing those subjects and schools levels. And I think, further evidences the need to have tools at our disposal to attract teachers into those positions, whether that is compensation-based approaches or other types of ways to make those working conditions more on par. But the reality is, even if we're able to have middle schools at the snap of our fingers become places where kids aren't going through their kind of
Yeah.
angsty, prepubescent transitions, we still have to account for the fact that um, the skills that some teachers develop are higher paid in the external labor market. And right now, our approach to compensation doesn't recognize that. And that shows in the instability and exactly in the ways that Megan described, with students often in places like high school math having, in hard to staff context, a rotating group of subs.
There was a pre-submitted question and also an audience question about declining birth rates. The pre-submitted one was, is there research examining declining birth rates, the effect of declining birth rates in future staffing needs? I guess I would open it up more broadly of like, I think that's another question for you, Matt. Like, how should we think about this if birth rates are declining and maybe we will need fewer teachers in the coming decades?
I think this question is counterintuitive. I think the simple analysis that we like to do in our heads is fewer kids, that means we need fewer teachers. And so more teachers leaving is less a problem because we'll need less teachers, problem solved. I think that the broader economic literature suggests the opposite, that students who are in high school and college that are making career decisions are going to want to make those decisions based on, in part, what they think are growth industries and growth professions, places where there are going to be increasing job opportunities. And when you have either plateauing or in some states, as we've seen, declining student enrollment in part due to declining birth rates, that's not going to make teaching a growth industry. And so I think that we're going to have to grapple with the implications that has, while demand from schools might need to tick down, that I think it may have even larger consequences for interest in future supply, not resolving in a long-term way the pressures that we currently face.
And the remote work piece of this is another supply pressure, right? Because we don't expect that schools ever to be able to offer teachers remote work as a perk, but more and more professions are, and that could just deter more and more people from going into teaching.
I think there's no doubt that there's real joy of being in a classroom with students and seeing their faces light up when they get something or hearing the latest joke.
Mhm.
Um, and so we may find that as AI changes our economy, that teachers have a particular advantage because it's a more robust profession relative to what AI, at least now, can kind of more immediately substitute for. But I think that the lack of flexibility in the profession that on the Monday or a Friday, I can't kind of be like, all right, it's just a little bit more like me individual work time. I'm going to take this from home. That just doesn't exist in our current formulation of K to 12 public education. And so I think that's always going to be a trade-off now that we're going to have to face. And the net on that, I think, is going to be it remains to be seen.
Another audience question. A lot of the turnover conversation focuses on pay and workload. What I hear from teachers here is different. They talk about not feeling backed by administration on behavior and about limits about what they're allowed to tell parents about what they're seeing in the classroom. Are you finding that in other districts, and is anyone tracking it as a turnover driver separate from compensation? I think, surveys have asked teachers why they leave, and I do think this sort of issue, certainly behavior, comes up. Megan, I guess I would wonder your thoughts on this from a classroom perspective about like the behavior issue and administrators backing teachers. Like, how do you think administrators should balance that? And also, have you seen that change over time?
I think it comes down to the relationship and the tone that administrators have set for how they support their teachers. In our district, we do an annual school experience survey, And one of the areas in which there was a low teacher response was, do I feel I can come to my administrator with my concerns? And I think if teachers don't feel that positive relationship, they don't feel like they're backed by their administrator, then yeah, you're walking on eggshells, to try to do the work. So I think it starts with setting that positive tone, having that positive school climate, and making sure that uh, your administrator and your staff are on the same page.
Here's another audience question. How do you see AI as potentially impacting teacher attrition? It could alleviate some of teachers' administrative and planning workload, but depending on how it's implemented and used, could make teaching more automated and rote than it already is. And I would add, it also could make, student cheating a problem and make teachers' jobs harder. Megan, I'm sort of curious what you see. I mean, you're coming at an elementary school perspective. Has AI been helpful to you in your job at all?
To be perfectly honest, I've been a little resistant to using AI tools and platforms. Um, I guess I'm just old school in that way. But I do think we have to tiptoe and be careful as we are integrating AI resources. Because while I hear mostly from um, publishers or platforms that, oh, this is going to give you your time back. You don't have to do this grading, you don't have to look at students' work. I think that's where the meaningful work is happening. It's when I am interfacing with students, when we're looking at their papers or their work together, that's really important. So I am a little bit hesitant on the use of AI, and I just want to make sure that however it's being integrated, we're focused on the students.
Matt, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that you could make a reasonable case that teachers will learn how to use AI in a way that provides some efficiencies. I'm not sure that that means that they're going to work less, though. I think they're just going to fill any efficiency time with other things because it's kind of a job with no end. It's like you can forever work on improving your craft or providing feedback. So I don't see it as kind of a net, like more leisure for teachers. I actually think it could be more problematic in the sense that I think we are grappling with the reality that at least early evidence suggests that when students use these tools in a way that reduces their effort or engagement, they may perform better with it, but without it, they have learned less. And so teachers are going to be fighting this kind of uphill Sisyphean battle of, well, I'm trying to get you to learn these core ideas and concepts, but when you leave this classroom, you may be using a tool to as a crutch. And so that snowballs over multiple grades, and then you're in high school trying to teach kids to read a complex, lengthy text, and they haven't built the tools to do that. I think that could be potentially really challenging and frustrating.
Last question. It's a pre-submitted audience one, and it's one near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure yours, Matt, which is what data/national data sets do you need to continue to do your research in this domain, or at least would help you do your research in this domain, Matt?
We have much, not all of it, but much of the data. It's just not standardized and aggregated. So HR systems in public school districts across the country have detailed data on their teachers. We need some guidance from the federal government to standardize the formats and variables that are in those. And then we need states to collect those in a timely and aggregate way. And then for the federal government to collect that from states so that we have a national, longitudinal, linked teacher workforce data set. And that would open up a huge possibility for us to diagnose in more real time what is happening, where is it happening? Because the reality is we've been talking about teachers and the labor market and turnover as this it's a monolith, but all the evidence suggests that what we really have is a constellation of micro labor markets that differ even in that micro area across teachers of different grades and subjects. And so, in order to understand the nuance and define targeted solutions, we need those HR data. And on top of that, if I'm going to wave my magic wand, we need to supplement it with the type of survey data that Megan described that happens in some states already, in other places in districts, and others not at all, to get a sense about what teachers are actually saying they're experiencing on the job so that we can make decisions that are informed by their voice.
This has been such a rich conversation. Before we close out, let me note two things to keep an eye out for. There will be a survey about this event that pops up as you close the Zoom. I read these responses really carefully, and I genuinely appreciate feedback that both about what you liked and what you would have liked to have happened better. So please consider filling that out. Second, we will be publishing a story about this issue and sharing the underlying data later today. So keep an eye out on your inbox or chalkbeat.org if you want to spend even more time digging into teacher turnover data. And I know some of you do. And again, if you have a specific question about the data, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to try to help. With that, I want to thank you all in the audience for being here, the rest of the Chalkbeat team who helped make this event happen behind the scenes, and our panelists, Matt and Megan, for a great conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks all.